Thanks for joining me. In this chapter, what we'll be discussing is what I actually bring in my backpack for a normal time-lapse shoot, and then I'm going to break down the camera settings on my camera. That way you know what to do when it comes to actually setting up your camera. And honestly, it's probably the best way to set up your camera. That way you can actually go out in the field, have everything ready to rock and roll, and then you just start shooting. So let's get started. So this is my backpack right here. I use the Low Pro Pro Tactic bag. It's freaking amazing. I absolutely love it. It really allows you to take quite a bit of different gear out in the field, and it's very ergonomical, especially if you're out hiking, whether you're out in the wilderness or even in the city. It just fits really nice and comfortably on your back. So I'll open this up. And for this loadout, what I'm actually doing is I'm doing like a 2-camera setup with 2 additional lenses per camera. That way, if I want to switch up the composition or if I want to actually set up something differently, I have that ability to do that. I also have enough room left in this bag, so if I wanted to pack a 3rd body, I could. And that would allow me to do even more shooting and whatnot. But at the same time, you have to make sure that you've got enough tripod heads or enough places to actually place the camera. So think about that when you go out shooting. Remember that you're going to have to bring all this gear with you unless you have somebody with you. So I also like to travel, just to start off, with my tripod here. This is the Gitzo Travel 1 carbon fiber tripod, and I absolutely love it. It is super lightweight, and it's pretty decently tall, probably about 5.5 feet in length, and I've got a ball head on here, and it holds up pretty well in the weather. I will say if there is a windy conditions, you do definitely have to weigh this down either with a sandbag or, like I said in the previous chapter, using the hammock, the tripod hammock, and that's probably my favorite thing to use for all my tripods, just because it's very easy to pack up and you can basically use whatever's around to just stabilize it. So this is always a go-to. I've got 2 of these, and if I am doing a dual camera setup, what I'll do is I'll bring that with me. Or both of them with me. That way I can set up 2 cameras at once. Now, let's get into the gear. So I bring a lot of stuff. Obviously, we're talking about 2 bodies. I do bring one of my Sony Alpha 1s with a battery pack. That way, if I want to do additional shooting for longer periods of time, because the batteries in the A1 last probably anywhere from around 2 to 3 hours on a single battery, the extended battery pack is nice because I can then use it for upwards of 6 to 7 hours, depending on exactly what I'm shooting. But it's really nice not having to change batteries mid-shoot. The A1 is my favorite camera to use because it's got a high resolution sensor. It also has great dynamic range, and the ISO on it can go up quite high. I've shot everything up to about 32,000 ISO with it, and with some noise reduction in post-production, the images just look absolutely beautiful. The next camera body that I bring with me is the A7S III. It is only a 4K camera, but at the same time, it allows me to really go up into higher ISOs, especially if I'm shooting astrophotography. And even just shooting 4K is great because it means that I'm, shooting for a 4K timeline, and I don't actually have to spend the extra resources, when it comes to hard drive space, because the file size in this is about a quarter of what the file size is in the Alpha 1. So it is nice to have, just a 4K simple camera setup. So if you are shooting, maybe you're delivering only at 1080p, this is a beautiful camera to have because then you can go 4K, downsample that to 1080p, retain all that beautiful resolution, and you can do a lot with it. Plus the ISO level on this is incredible. I do love shooting with Astro again, and it's just a really nice all-around camera. I also usually bring the 24 to 70 because the more zooms you have, the better, I think, in your bag, especially if you want to travel light. This way I can go from 24 to 70 millimeters at 2.8, so I've got some low light capabilities in there, and it's great during the daytime. I then also bring 2 ultra-wide lenses. I've got the 14 1.8 here, and I like this specifically just for astro. So if I am going out on an astro shoot, I will 100% bring this because you want to have the fastest aperture lens possible when you're out shooting astro. And this really does hit the nail on the head because of the sharpness and just the ability to see the Milky Way at 1.8, and it means that the shutter speed on the camera can be a lot faster. I can actually have intervals of anywhere between maybe 6 to 8 seconds in there, and that's really what we want to look for when we're shooting astro. Now, if I'm not shooting astro, I'll leave this at home. I'll put another body in here or swap it out for another lens, but you can always just reduce the amount of weight in your backpack and just skip it. But this is something that I normally bring on every shoot. The next is my go-to wide-angle lens, and that's the 12 to 24 2.8. I absolutely love this lens. This never really leaves my bag just because it's, quite honestly, for me, the perfect time-lapse lens because I can go ultra-wide without getting the fisheye look, and then I can go even tighter up to 24 and still retain more detail, give it a little more graphical feel to it. But I really do love this lens. And the fact that I can also put on rear filters on the back here, so if I want to put NDs on, I can do that. It doesn't, nothing has to go over front of the lens up here, and it's just very ergonomical for me. This is probably the heaviest lens that I have in my kit right now, but it's also probably the most critical and useful lens that I have for time lapse. The other lens that I have on the A1 is the 16 to 35 power zoom. It's only f4, but I do love it because it's literally half the weight, well, almost half the weight of the regular 16 to 35 G Master, which is a 2.8 lens. But this is great for during daytime situations if I want to shoot, you know, wide and then get more graphical at 35 millimeters. But it's a super light lens, and I really I like the image quality from it. It's sharp. There's not a lot of coma or chromatic aberration with it, and it's really nice for just, you know, creating beautiful, simple time-lapse setups. And the last lens that I normally bring will be my favorite 70 to 200 Mark II. This guy is super lightweight for a 70 to 200 millimeter lens, but it really allows me to punch into a scene if I want to. I can get really nice detailed shots of like the tops of buildings, or I can punch into a scene maybe at like a memorial or something and actually capture all that beautiful detail that's happening. And the sharpness that comes with this lens is out of this world. I would compare this to the 50 millimeter 1.2 that's out there. It is tack sharp. It is absolutely gorgeous to use. And depending on what the subject is, this can be a really useful lens to have, especially because it goes from 70 to 200 millimeters. You can even throw on a 2x extender if you really wanted to punch into something. But at the same time, it's also lightweight and a really great lens to have in your kit if you're looking to do something different. Moving on to filters, we talked about the different types of clip-in filters that I use. I always bring my sensor clip-in filters as well as my rear element lens filters. And I use these the most because they're very ergonomical. I can pack both of these in here together and they don't take up that much space, and comparative to having to have step-up rings and larger cases for the screw-ons, or even if I'm bringing like a 100 millimeter filter plate for my matte box, those all just take up a lot of space. So for me, ergonomically, these two make the most sense, and they really help out because I can swap it out with any lens if I'm using the in-sensor body clip that goes in the camera. And that way it just makes life so much easier, and especially when we're talking about having to use ND filters to drag that shutter out in the real world, having those is just really, it's a must-have in any time-lapser's bag. The other accessory I will bring is I will bring a intervalometer, just because you never know if something happens. You always want to have a backup. But this is also nice too if you want to do HDR, and I really do enjoy doing HDR sometimes, and so this is a really good, helpful tool for that. The other accessory I bring is my card pack. You never want to leave home without memory cards. I have quite a few in here, and one rule that I like to make, and this is something I've done probably for the last 12 years or so, is if the card is ready to be used, it's going to be face up in my bag, and if it's face down like these two are, it means that they need to be downloaded or ingested into the system. So I know that's a system that a lot of people use, and if you haven't been using that system, I highly recommend it, because it really makes a lot of sense, and it's very helpful, especially in a situation where you're like, I need a memory card, and I want to make sure that I get the shot, so you can, you know, come in here, grab the card that you know is good to go, and leave the ones that you know aren't. So that's my setup for memory cards. And then I always bring at least 3 extra batteries per camera, so that's going to give me a total runtime of anywhere between 8 to 12 hours per camera, and that's definitely needed, especially when you're out shooting for long periods of time. So I'll go out for an entire day, and obviously not have to, you know, it won't be without battery power, but having those extra batteries is very pivotal, because you don't want to be out there shooting, you come across this beautiful scene, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm out of battery power. So I always make sure to pack extra batteries. And then, of course, with any photographer's kit, I've got a blower. We want to make sure that our lens is clear of any dust or debris before we start shooting. And then I also bring out a multi-tool. A multi-tool is super important because there's so many times and so many situations where you need, you know, a knife, or you need an Allen wrench, or you need a screwdriver, and it's really great to have you know, this tool, because then you can fix any situation usually. So this never leaves my bag. But that pretty much does it for my standard time-lapse bag. I also include different Arca Swiss type plates for the mounts that I use, and I also include 2 extra ones just in case something happens, because bringing backups on your shoot is very important. A backup will ultimately save you if something happens, and you don't want to be out in a situation where you're like, oh, I wish I had this piece of material or this equipment, and I don't because I just didn't want to pack it. And while that does add to some extra weight on your back, at the same time, there's peace of mind that comes with that. And honestly, peace of mind, especially on a shoot, is very good to have. So that'll wrap that up, but I also make sure that on my bag I put a couple of carabiners. This way if I need to hang my bag from somewhere, or if I need to hang something from my bag, like an extra tripod or accessories, I have that ability to do that. So let's get to talking about the camera settings now and how I set it up for time-lapse. So you've seen how I've set up my travel bag. Now we're going to set up the camera specifically for time-lapse. That way you can get the most out of your camera. Really easy, super simple to do. The first thing we're going to do when we're setting up our camera is we're going to make sure that we have our favorites in our menu system. If you are using Sony, you can copy this one-to-one, but if you are using Canon, Nikon, or Fuji, or another camera manufacturer, you're probably going to have to do this on whatever system or UI that you currently have. So we're going to do this on the Sony though, and I absolutely love it. So the touchscreen option here, I've created a menu system that's specifically just for time-lapse, and I'll tell you why it's specifically for time-lapse. So the first thing in our list right here is we have our format, and format's going to allow us to format our memory cards as they come in. One thing that I like to do before any setup or any shoot is to make sure that the cards are formatted ahead of time, that there's no other data on there, and this really just allows us, or allows me I should say, to make sure that everything that's going on the card is what's going to be going or uploaded onto my computer when it comes time for ingesting. And this is important because you don't want to mix files from another project with a current project. That way you just keep it much more managed and it's a lot easier when it comes to actually ingesting it. The next is the most important one, which is the interval time-lapse setting. And I have that as my second because basically this is where you're going to come in and set up for your shot. I'll break down what the interval function actually does in a minute, but we're going to continue on with the menu system. The next on the list is file format, and this is for shooting video. And a lot of the times when I shoot time-lapse, I also shoot video because I want to be able to marry the two together sometimes, especially if I'm shooting water. Water is one of those things that I hate to time-lapse, and it really, honestly, there's nothing that looks really good about water, especially like waves crashing in an ocean or something like that. So what I'll do is I'll actually set up a file structure so that I can change the format, whether that's 4K or 8K, and that way when I come back into post-production, I can actually blend real-time video with the time-lapse together, and it creates a really fun piece of work, and I'll show you how to do that when we get to post-production phase. The next is the movie setting, which then just takes care of the different types of functionality for the frame rate. So it's their 24p, 30p, 60p, 120p, but that's usually just left alone unless I'm shooting video. The next is S35 mode, and S35 mode is just if you want to crop in if you're using an APS-C lens, or if you just want some extra depth in your shot. Let's say you're shooting with a 70 to 200 and you want to just reach in a little bit more, that's going to pull a little more resolution out. Now it is going to shrink the resolution of the composition, but at the same time it is going to give you just a little bit more range from your lenses. The next is steady shot, and steady shot is on here for a good reason, because when you are shooting time-lapse you want to make sure that there's no steady shot or stabilization happening in your camera, because especially with these newer camera bodies, what they're actually doing is doing active steadying even if they're on a tripod. And what can happen is if there's like a wind movement or something hits the sensor, you'll actually see the sensor kind of dip in and out of focus, and as well as the rotation. So you really want to make sure that any kind of image stabilization is turned off in your camera. If we come down to my next page, again, I've got another steady shot here, and this is going to open up to an active setting, so I can either do active, standard, or off. If I'm shooting time-lapse, I'm going to turn this into the off position, just like that. And then I've got my ISO. Now, here's where it's really fun, is the ISO on the Sony cameras is great, because if we come all the way up to the top here where it says auto, you'll see that it comes up with a minimum and maximum for ISO. And this is great if you're doing day to night transition, which when we get to day and night transitions, I'll tell you how to use that, and we can set that up right now for it. But what I'd like to do is I set the minimum ISO to the lowest, which is 100 on this camera. And then if I want the highest, this is what the highest it's going to give me. If I go to highest, I can change this anywhere up to, 12,000, 20,000, 32,000. But generally speaking, I like to keep the ISO relatively low, especially if I'm doing day to night sequences. And I'm going to keep that at ISO 640 because of ISO invariance, which allows us in post to actually raise it up above the ISO level without generating any more noise. So that's something we'll talk about in post-production. But for the majority of my shots, even most of my Astro shots, I'm going to be shooting at 640 ISO or 1250 ISO. And it just depends on what you want. Whatever your camera's dual ISO base is really what you want to be shooting at. Because of ISO invariance, you can then go back into post-production and then change those without adding too much noise to your shot, which is really wonderful. And then next, I do peaking display. And peaking display, what it's going to do is it's going to allow you to, if you are using a manual lens, see a focus point on your image, and it's going to show you where the focus is on the camera. And this is really great for doing nighttime photography or astrophotography, because it's going to allow you in the dark to really make sure that your cameras focus and dial in. There's another feature and functionality that I'll talk about in a second that's also pivotal, and one of the reasons why I love using Sony, because of the its adaptive brightness. And what you can actually do is you click the button back here, and in the pitch darkness, what it's going to do is actually do kind of like a long exposure, but it's going to show you what the frame is and if you're in focus, and it's a real game changer, especially if you like astrophotography and you have troubles focusing at night. The next is zebra display, and zebras are important because you want to make sure you're not overexposing your scene. I use zebras for everything, and when we are shooting time-lapse, we really want to be aiming for our highlights when we're shooting. That way in post-production we can bring out the shadows and the midtones and really create a nice balanced image. So that is one thing when we do start shooting time-lapse, is to make sure that you're exposing for the highlights. And a lot of people don't do that, and I think that you can actually see that in their work, because what's going to happen is you're going to have those highlights blown out, let's just say if the exposure changes, but the midtones and shadows remain the same. So I always like to go for the highlights, just because I know I can recover those in post, and I can also recover the shadows and the midtones, just because the dynamic range on this camera is so great. Now we're going to go into the custom button settings, and custom buttons are really important for me because I want to be able to do everything quickly and efficiently. When you're out shooting time-lapse, maybe you're in a situation where the sky is exploding with color and you really want to make sure that it's good to go quickly. So I've mapped certain keys to other functionalities or custom buttons on my camera, and it just makes for a night and day difference. What you can do is come down to your custom keys, and if you go to photo settings, on my first one, number custom 1, I've got the ISO, so if I need to change the ISO during the shoot, I can easily do that. The next I have is my manual focus selection and toggle, and I can also zoom in for that. And that's important to me because if I'm using a manual lens, I need to make sure that when I zoom in, I can actually see the focus and that everything is perfectly in focus. Because if your shot's out of focus, guess what? You've just sat there for a couple hours and you're going to come back with nothing. So make sure that your camera's always in focus, and by doing that you can zoom in, see the focus as it's happening, and it's really wonderful. The next thing for me is bright monitoring, and we had talked about that earlier, and bright monitoring for me really allows me to go in and focus at night. It illuminates the scene, it creates a long shutter speed inside the camera internally, and it keeps it up long enough that you can actually use it to focus on. And it's one of those things that it's not really talked a lot about in the photo community, but it is definitely one of those must-haves if you want to focus at night. Now that we've got the custom options done, let's talk about actually setting up for the time-lapse, because again, that's the most important aspect. One of the biggest things I see a lot of first-time time-lapse photographers doing is they'll leave on auto anything. So whether that's auto focus, auto white balance, auto ISO, anything and everything that's auto should be turned off completely on your camera. So you should be using a direct Kelvin temperature for your white balance. If you are not sure of what it should be, you can use one of the presets, and either daylight or shadow is probably what you're going to be shooting during the day, and if you're at night, maybe incandescent if that's what the light calls for. But having that's really important, because when you get to the post-production phase, if you use auto white balance, what's going to happen is you're going to see color flicker in your shot. And while it is correctable sometimes, there's other times that it's not. And that's the big problem. So you want to make sure that when you are doing it, that your white balance is set to a standard white balance. I have mine usually set on sunny or cloudy, and that usually gives me a go-to, because we are shooting raw. We can go back into post-production later and change that up without losing any of the data in the imagery, which is great. The next thing, like I said before, you want to make sure that any kind of image stabilization is turned off. That's both on the lens and in the camera. So in the camera, make sure that you turn off the image stabilization, whether you're using a 5-axis, 6 or 8-axis stabilization, turn it off. If your lens has image stabilization, turn it off. Because even though the camera is stationary, those active stabilizers can actually become active even just sitting there, and they may alter or twist the shot in such a way that it's going to disrupt your time lapse. So by turning those off, you're negating any kind of issue with that. The next is aperture. If you have a manual lens that allows you to do a manual aperture, I highly recommend it. A lot of the newer lenses today, they don't produce flicker. In the past, if you're using an electronic lens that was actually activating the iris by itself, you could have flicker, because every time the shutter went down, what would happen is that iris would actually close down and then open back up. And when it does that, it creates flicker, because it doesn't necessarily go back to the exact same spot. It could be a few microns off, but what happens is then it creates flicker in post, and then that just becomes an issue for you later on, and you don't want that. So if you do have a manual aperture lens, I highly recommend doing it and setting the aperture that way. That way you know that you're just going to have the cleanest possible image, which is great, and it just means less work in post-production. The next thing is we want to make sure that our ISO and our shutter speed are also manual. And we will talk about the times where you can use aperture priority and ramping for your ISO, but that's going to be for the day to night transition. But really, if you are shooting just any kind of daytime or nighttime shots, you should be shooting in manual mode only, because manual mode is going to give you the best possible outcome when it comes to setting up for your shot. Now we'll talk about how the intervalometer works. This is the most important part for time-lapse. Going into our menu system here, I'll click on my custom menu, and then I'll go to the interval shoot function. And inside this menu, you're going to see everything from interval shooting to interval start time, shoot interval, number of shots, AE tracking sensitivity. And if we go over to the other page, we learn about the shutter interval and then shutter interval priority. And these are really important for creating beautiful day to night sequences. But let's just start at the top here. If we come in here and it says interval shooting, what this is telling us is that the camera right now is not in interval shooting mode. What we want to do is we want to turn that to on. And then for shooting start time, this is how fast you can get away from the camera after you've touched it. I leave it at 1 second because I'm pretty good at, clicking the button and then pulling away. But maybe you want to leave this at maybe 2 to 4 seconds. That way you have enough time to pull yourself back so you're not touching the camera, because again, any kind of vibration that you create is going to be impacted on the camera and on your frame. So if you want to, maybe leave that at 1 to 3 seconds, but I'll choose 1 second in this instance. Next is the shooting interval, which is the most important, and it's very easy to activate. You just click the button, and then you choose what your interval is. You could do anywhere from 1 to 60 seconds. In most cases, I'm going to be choosing between 1 and 4 seconds, but we'll just do 1 second here. And then the number of shots. And the number of shots is important because in a 24p timeline, you have to do the calculations of how long the shot's going to be. 400 frames is about 16 seconds, 800 frames is about 32 seconds, so 700 frames is about 30 seconds. Now, you can change this to whatever you want. Just remember that the more frames you have, the more space and more disk space it's going to take up on your camera and inside of your computer. So think about that in terms of how much you actually want to shoot. For me personally, I usually do anywhere between 600 and 800 frames for most of my shots. That way, if I'm doing something for stock, I've got at least 30 seconds of footage, and that's what most companies and most corporations want for their advertising, somewhere in that range. Now we can come down to AE tracking sensitivity, and this is really important for our day to night sequences. And what I usually do is I'll keep this at high, and what that means is it's going to track the exposure as it's happening, and it's going to be very judicial in what's happening. So if a light source changes from very bright to less bright, what this is going to actually do is balance that image out and create something that looks much more exposure neutral. And that's great because when you start doing day to night ramping, as that exposure changes, whether the sun's going down and the moon's coming up or vice versa, you want to be able to have this camera do very small incremental steps, and setting it to high is going to allow you to do that. On the next page is the shutter interval, and you can choose either electronic or mechanical. I just prefer the electronical shutter because it's quiet and honestly I just enjoy it better. And then when you have this in aperture priority mode, you're going to get the shoot interval priority option. And that's really good, especially when we come to creating day to night sequences, because what this is going to tell the camera is even if the exposure goes beyond what the interval is, let's just say it's nighttime and we're shooting astro, we can have the camera stop at, say, 8 seconds for the shutter speed, and then on the 9th second, it's going to prioritize that interval, and that means that the exposure in the camera is never going to jump past 9 seconds. So that's a great way to put a hard stop on your time lapse, especially if you're doing any kind of ramping day into night. And honestly, it's quite pivotal. Otherwise, if you didn't leave this on, what's going to happen is that exposure might go upwards of 10, 12, 14 seconds. Meanwhile, your interval is at 9 seconds. So that means you're actually going to be missing or skipping intervals because the camera is going to be firing during those other intervals. And that's just going to throw your whole sequence off. So having the interval priority function is a must in your camera, for sure. Now, when you are ready to start shooting, since I have a custom button here, I can just come up here. I've got my interval shooting. I can turn it to on. And now all I have to do is click the camera. And what it's going to do is it's going to tell me that it's going to start entering the interval shoot mode, and it's going to start going. In the next chapter, we'll talk about setting up compositions for time lapse and then actually shooting your time lapse. Thanks for joining me.